Welcome, David. Welcome, Sasha. Thanks for taking time out and speaking with the LeadSquared podcast team. This is one of our first ones where we try and address some of the impending challenges we face in the convergence of technology and operations in higher ed education. Uh, a quick introduction from my side, and then I'll request both you and Sasha to David, introduce yourself a little bit and potentially begin this conversation. So I have with me today David Burge, who's the Vice President of Enrollment at George Mason University. David brings with him a lot of experience in this vertical. And David, thanks really for taking time out and joining.
Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
We also have Sasha Peterson, who's the CEO of Science Interactive Group right now. He's also a very tenured education technology individual. And I'll let Sasha speak a little bit about himself as we proceed with this conversation. Sasha, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here as well. And yeah, well, my current role is a bit outside of the enrollment domain. Everything prior to that has been in that world. When I first met David, in like before it feels like we worked in enrollment since then.
Perfect, perfect. So that's a good place to start, David and Sasha. I was thinking, a broad theme for our conversation today, considering LeadSquared is a technology admissions end-to-end suite, and we sort of work across that spectrum. A good discussion point for us, a broad theme would be, we are seeing this change of, is it going to be digital first? And when we look at enrollments, or is it going to be digital enabled in the future? So I thought that could be a good broad theme considering the rapid changes we are seeing, some macroeconomic pressures on the higher ed institutes. So I thought that could be a good cover for a broad conversation. To begin, our next 30 minutes or so, we are obviously hearing and feeling and sensing a decline in enrollments potentially over the next coming years. So maybe I start by asking David, if you could talk to us a little bit about your background, one, and then about, what's the lay of land as you look at enrollments in recent times right now and a little bit into the future as well.
Sure. Well, this recruitment and enrollment cycle is my 27th since joining the profession, and at my fourth university to go through it. And Sasha mentioned I've known Sasha for a long time. When I first met Sasha, the state of play was very different in terms of the pressures on an admissions operation, specifically at, let's say, larger publics or even mid-sized publics. In the 25 years since I met Sasha, what's changed quite a bit is I have felt an escalation over and over and over again in terms of one, the value of a disciplined recruitment and new student enrollment operation, and then also the expectations and involvement of senior leadership in said activities. Right, like it used to be, you set it up, you send your admission staff out to the road, you see what happens, and those publics would sort of like let the chips fall where they may, if you will. Nobody would, certainly didn't have the same type of intensity as today. So with that comes opportunity, and if we're all under in intense pressure, and the market is shrinking at the same time, which is what the enrollment cliff would lead us to believe, something's got to give. And so at Mason, for example, right, we have yet to enter the cliff period because our target market in Northern Virginia is still growing, and actually has been growing pretty well. But what we've seen competition swoop in, not just in terms of like boots on the ground and digital advertising, actual physical campuses constructed in our service area for purposes of taking some of that enrollment and insulating other institutions against that. That's problematic for us and problematic for everybody at the same time.
Right. Very, very interesting. And we'll come back to that. It's very interesting. Whilst you wouldn't imagine in a declining sort of, as you said, market or in shrinking market, more and more competition coming in. You face a very unique situation, but we'll come back to that in a bit.
Right.
Sasha, a little bit about your background, please, and what do you feel about the lay of land as far as enrollments go right now?
Yeah, so as David said, we met, I guess, 25 years ago, which is a little shocking to say out loud, and was involved in a small startup that initially we didn't know what market we were going to serve, but ended up in education, and it became my career, and have been involved really from the beginning of the world of CRM before anybody was willing to call it that. And I've worked with a number of platforms, whether it be LeadSquared or any of the other large ones, or any of the smaller proprietary ones as well. And so I've been involved in this world, and really learned a lot from people like David along the way. I recognize that demographics is a real thing, and that there will be fewer people, as David pointed out. There are certainly pockets where that's not the case. I remember last time we had this big demographic cliff coming. Atlanta was a really fast growing area, so all the schools around there never thought twice about it. So I acknowledge it's a real thing, but I also feel like if I see another podcast focused around this pending demographic cliff, I'm going to scream, because it's happened before. It's going to happen
Right.
again. It's just a cyclical thing, and it's not like the world is ending. So I think it's people that are looking for things to talk about, and worry about. And as you know, the world today, while the growth in population has shifted to different areas, that's one real change. The other real change is the modality by which education is given. And so last time, online education wasn't really as prominent as it is today. As I mentioned, my role in my company today serves online programs primarily. And when I started here, I was shocked to learn how many traditional nonprofits have robust online education as well. And so I don't know that it's a question, back to your opening point, which I'm sure we'll get back into more, whether it's digital or physical. I think it's both. And I think it depends very heavily on what type of student you're going to be recruiting. So in a world where traditional undergrads might be declining for the next couple of years, you might be well served to think more about non-traditional students and your online programs. But it's easy for me to say that because I'm not in Burge's chair. But from the outside looking in, it feels like a manageable problem.
Well, and
Sure.
Sasha, like that's the silver lining of the enrollment cliff, is I think it forces, I'm just going to say the word, lazy institutions who haven't diversified their enrollment portfolio in
Yeah.
decades, who see them as serving as in almost like a K-16 type of role. That's the institution who I don't know. I think the future is going to be tough for those folks,
Yeah.
because that pool is getting smaller. People like me and other big bads that are out there who are very well situated in terms of price and in terms of proximity to population, and have already diversified enrollment pipelines in whatever way that could be. And that is, if those institutions don't, it's not just about delivering the message to market, it's about changing the proposition in order to attract different people.
Makes sense. And a quick follow-up on that, David. So whether it is the declining market size, or in your case may not be the issue, but organizations, institutions still need to, like you said, one, diversify, and two, become more efficient, obviously, in what they do. So both of these pressures are, let's say, likely to be there in the foreseeable future as things get more and more tighter and competitive. Now, what impact does that have for you and your team and your operations overall? Diversification is one thing, but that does have an impact on your backend operations. What does it mean to, cost? What does it mean to multiple functions? What does it mean to marketing? What does it mean to the admissions office? Maybe a little bit of color there might be helpful for us to understand.
I mean, the short answer is it makes it harder, and it requires more powerful tools in order to make it work. I mean, there are a suite of services that will do 5 or 6 traditional admissions functions really well. And
Right.
they're somewhat turnkey in terms of how you can implement them. And that if that's all you want to do, is the same 5 or 6 functions over and over again, that's great. If you desire any innovation around the of serving different populations, I mean that's a complicated structure that you have to build because the
Yep.
student needs are very different, and you have to have technology that enables you to do that. So that's the first thing. I think it increases your demand on smart technical tools and the associated support that goes underneath it. The next is the actual structure of the academy, and Sasha mentioned this, earlier on, which is, so there's a central enrollment team that I've been a part of at every place that I've worked, but that central enrollment team is not always tasked with the diversity of those functions. Online recruits for online, grad recruits for grad, career and professional education recruits for CPE. There's a centralization effort that I see happening, or at least pressure to centralize to gain efficiencies, because at the more chaotic institutions,
Right.
you're actually competing against yourself in a lot of
Yep.
different ways, and you have to build structures to minimize that.
Yeah, so more complex structures for sure. Sasha, moving on to you a little bit to hear you out. What does it mean for budgets? What does it mean for resourcing people, skill sets internally, and of course, technology as well?
Yeah, Dave just mentioned the word efficiency, which I think today especially is a little bit of a scary term to people, because I think efficiency often will mean reductions and
Yep.
consolidations and
Yep.
and radical change. And so I want to preface what I'm about to say that I don't think efficiency is always bad, particularly, unfortunately, in the world of higher education, change can be slow. And so I think part of that consolidation is efficiency and just wanting to be, smarter with your money. Part of it is a forced efficiency, as Burge said, but I also think there is an inherent benefit from this consolidation, because one of the things that has, other than the competing against yourself, which is obviously not optimal, one of the things that I've dreamt of for years is this notion of a centralized experience as a student.
Mhm.
And I will admit that I'm this close to waving a white flag and just kind of giving up and saying, I don't think it's possible in the US, or really maybe anywhere, to have the same high touch, great experience that we've all once in a while. And I'll admit this is a problem in the commercial world as well. But once in a while, you'll have a good experience. You'll go to a restaurant or a hotel, or
Yeah.
even engage with your bank and have like a perfectly tuned experience. Not everything goes well perfectly, but they're in touch with each other, they're communicating with each other, and ultimately that experience is a good one. That is a rarity, if ever, on a college campus, because of this natural decentralization. So back to the question you're asking around what that impact is on budgets, it could be significant. It could be radical. If you find that you've got, as Burge said, 5 different offices essentially
Yeah.
doing the same function, oftentimes to the same people, that's just
Yeah.
insane. And so again, this word of efficiency sounds scary because, some jobs might be eliminated, but it doesn't necessarily mean a bad outcome, because there are certainly other roles on that campus that are perhaps not being served, that could be served by people not doing the same job. But ultimately, I think the campuses that are really going to succeed are not only ones thinking about diversity of educational modality, but ones that actually think about a student-centric experience, that recognize that this is a service business. And the
Yeah.
more efficient you can make it for the student to find the information they need, is the
Yeah.
program offered? Can I afford it? Are there financial aid opportunities? Now, what do I do that I'm in? All these kind of steps that technology certainly was designed to
Right.
facilitate. That same technology has been around for 20 years, and yet we still have that
Mhm.
problem that you
Yeah.
don't have a smooth entry point for students. So I think it's a net good if people can finally get that, not just from the entry point, but for the ultimate, like, making the student successful as well.
Well, I totally agree. And this is the example I always use when I talk about this, is that I would rather a student spend an hour engaged in faculty conversation, actually studying and reading the materials, developing group projects, all the academic work that's associated with going to university. I don't want them spending an hour trying to figure out how to pay their financial aid bill, or I want that to be intuitive, to where that time on task, that efficiency, that gain goes to the consumer. And the consumer can spend that efficiency any way they want to. And ideally, they're investing in their academic structure with that. But even if they're not, even if that just means now they can get a job, and as so many students have to do to go through university, or spend time with their kids, or whatever it happens to be. Like, I don't want to take that hour from them. We shouldn't want to.
That's excellent points from both of you. And I think the key word I heard, David, you speak is consumer. So, whilst it may be a little controversial calling a student a consumer, but it is what they are. I believe in that too. There's a service being consumed. If we don't think about consumerism as a bad thing, we are saying there is services to be provided. In this case, it's education. And there is a consumer who needs to consume that service. So it is operationally very similar to most at scale B2C problems, which has been solved in potentially other industries. So a related question is, do you see, because of more sort of getting towards a consumerism sort of operational approach, which both of you alluded to a little bit, that we see some cross-referencing learnings from other verticals, industries, operations, etc., starting to flow into the education vertical?
I hope. I mean, honestly, as I mentioned earlier, when I first started in this business, people were afraid to call a CRM a CRM. Nobody was like, "Oh, you can't say that. You can't talk about customers."
Right.
And so the fact that we are brave enough now to acknowledge that this tool is a consumer tool, I think is a step in the right direction. What I always encourage my teams, and as I said earlier, I've never worked on campus, but I've served campuses for forever. Whenever I'm either on campus or talk to my own team, I always emphasize, put yourself in the shoes of a consumer and think about the best experience you've had, wherever that may be, and what little bits can you take from that. And I do think, while slow, as I said earlier, there are positive signs happening within the enrollment and broader educational landscape. I think the fact that there are people thinking very deliberately about what a campus tour should look like. And it's not just, some kid with shorts walking around and pointing to, where they hang out, but really a well thought out, curated experience to make you appreciate, the beauty of the campus, the resources of the campus, and the people of the campus, right? That is a consumer behavior that's happening on campuses. Equally, the technology that's being used now, right? There are, CRM's been now established as a must-have. And there are increasing places where people are using, automation to allow you to pay your bills more quickly, to find information more quickly. And I think that's positive. So I hope that it continues. I do, as I said earlier, I know that there is a level you can get to, and it ends up getting, maybe too far in that direction. And I do think that academia is a special place and is a unique place, and it should continue to be that. But there are a lot of lessons that we can all learn from our lives that should be applied to where we're working.
There's a ton of heroes and villains in other verticals to look at, right? Like, I mean, you look at, and when we were looking at this, at the same time we were looking at CRM at Mason, we were looking for a culture partner to help us shape the way we just perceive the work. And so, we looked at Disney, we looked at the Cleveland Clinic. Outside of education verticals, we looked for help. I mean, we see some places in higher ed that are doing slightly better than others, but to Sasha's point, there is a point of that you get into those infrastructures that you're going to encounter stress, and so I don't see sort of a perfect entity out there, but I do see opportunities that we can glean from some of these places. And the brand, your legacy brand identity is not going to be worth enough to buy you out of this problem, you're going to have to evolve, and your service model is a part of that evolution.
Right. And you know what we are also seeing and have seen over the past 4 or 5 years is a change in B2B as well as B2C buying behavior overall. It doesn't matter what you're purchasing, but let's just say, overall B2B, B2C buying behavior, because of information being available and much more easily disseminated, a lot of that behavior is moving more and more to self-serve. People don't want to interact with salespeople if tagged, quote unquote, for example. So you'd much rather prefer you choose yourself, you decide yourself, you want to lead that conversation, evaluate on your own terms, and what have you. So that's a SaaS trend, technology trend we have been seeing anyway. Question for both of you is there a self-serve play on the student side, and specifically as it leads to enrollment and admissions as well? And there's, of course, a technology element to that. There is a human element to that. So far, traditionally, the human component may have been higher, but if you agree that there is a self-serve trend, which is likely or already happening, and student admissions, then what are we doing, or what's the best way to address that?
Do you mind if I tackle this first?
Go
ahead. I had a very unique experience with my own college journey. I knew where I wanted to go, and I knew if I'm getting in, I'm going there. I never went on a college tour. I didn't apply to very many schools. And I know that's very, very unique. My oldest daughter just went through, she's a freshman now in college, and that was a radically different experience than I had. She went to a bunch of campuses, applied to very, very many more. And so those two experiences, I think, dictate heavily where self-service can and cannot be helpful. One of the things that we always talk about with technology, even 20 years ago, was the notion that enrollment counselors should be counseling students. They should be talking about this is a good fit or not a good fit. And I didn't need that because I knew whether I am going in or not going in. My daughter could have used that and did use that often. And so I think it shouldn't be a binary choice. I think it really should be an optimization to leverage the resources that every campus has, which are these great people that are passionate, often alums themselves, that can talk about the campus experience, about the programs, about the financial aid, about the other resources available. Those are never going to be communicated in a self-service way. So for people like me, make it easy. Let me put in a bunch of information, put in a credit card, and be done with it. And then let me, I don't ever have to talk to anybody. And by doing that, by really facilitating a good self-service, easy to understand, efficient to get what you need done process, it should open up massive amounts of time for people that today are answering voicemails and sending responses to emails for basic stuff that shouldn't have to be answered if you've got a good self-service system. So that's the way that I would think would make sense to think about it, and hopefully is.
Let me hit the 2025 center square on the bingo card and throw out AI in this conversation, right? Can you have any conversation anywhere without mentioning AI? And so I completely agree with Sasha, and refine it a little bit to say that there's a distinction between what I'll call sales and service resolution, right? Like those are two different functions. So at least for purposes of this answer. So on the service, delivery and the resolution of issues, we can depend and should depend more and more and more on self-service, automation, artificial intelligence to drive that. Again, that hour that we want to save our students to invest in other activities can be enabled that way. Now, the sales process, the recruitment process, though, I think is going to move more slowly. I'm not saying that it's never going to move, but it's going to move more slowly to where, I think our consumers will quickly catch up to what is AI and what is not AI, understand that sales or conversion of any sort is going to take active listening, pairing, developing an emotional connection to the to what we're asking the folks to purchase. And that's just going to take a little bit longer. So I don't know. I mean, to Sasha's point, we loved people like Sasha in our recruitment funnels everywhere we are, because when I call them the true believers. The people who we tag early on, it's like, yeah, if this kid gets in, this kid is coming. They're the ones who show up at the recruitment events 20 minutes before they start. They leave 20 minutes after they're over, if they show up at all.
Right.
And our investment's so much less. So I guess it's a balancing act between those two things.
Sure. No, good point. And I think I agree with you more or less that it's probably be slightly slower to get there, but if consumer behavior moves towards on the same lines as in other verticals, then it has to get there, So I think that's the other way to also look at it. So we have heard you also mention the word connections. I have heard that word multiple times too, student connections, human connections with student. What does it actually mean for you? What does it mean for numbers? What does it mean for matrix? Is it something which is tracked? Is it just a buzz? Is it a different way of saying engage the student the right way? What does it mean? Maybe we start with you, David.
Well, connections, like I work very hard in my line of work to kind of make this as boring as possible, right? Like connections are engagement with the website, engagement with the staff, engagement with the materials that we send. And some of them are easy to track, and some of them we talk about a lot only because we can track them. It doesn't mean they're necessarily more or less effective. It's just that we know a little bit about digital conversion. So we spend a lot of time talking and worrying about digital conversion. Much of our core business, though, remains driven by the personal connections that we can't quantify, that when you might be able to see in the CRM, yeah, I talked to David or rather, David talked to Sasha and he's considering coming, and here's what we know about it. But in the end, like the way that Sasha felt about that conversation, the way it improved or didn't improve his relationship with whatever I'm trying to get him to sign on for, like that's something that is harder to quantify, but is buried in those connections. And so we still aspire to try to figure out how to be as efficient as possible, and that extra hour that we gain by not managing microprocesses, we want to invest in a more human-to-human connection, but we know that you can't scale that, right? Like there's a finite nature to that. So we have to apply that to the students and the recruits that would best benefit from that. And so the ability for the technology to allow us to see that and determine which type of connection would be most effective makes us more effective.
Yeah, absolutely. Sasha, your take on this point?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with everything David said, and not much to add other than, I think just reinforcing that optimizing the human connection that is with the best AI possible, I don't believe is going to be matched by an actual person that can speak to you and speak to their experience on the campus that they were at. That's what technology should be doing, facilitating the ability for you to leverage your human resources as effectively as possible, which is going to be getting those really meaningful conversations with people that are needing to have them.
Yeah, and it gets us to, I think two things which overlap a little bit in my head, at least. One, we have again heard about this at length in different verticals, also in education. What does personalization at scale mean? I mean, it's a very cliched word, but you're saying, yes, it is something which everybody needs, but what does it really mean? So we spoke about it a little bit. It's an amalgamation of, I think, a lot of these connections, and you're sort of tuning those connections to be a little bit more in line with the individual, in this case, a student, in other verticals case, a consumer, but it's sort of the same problem to be solved. A large part of that personalization, according to me, comes from good data. Prior to that interaction happening, I mean, otherwise, how do you personalize if you don't have the data involved to be able to structure into a particular bucket or strata or segment, if you will, and then align your interactions or connections? Who's the human interacting? What is the technology interactions going to be? What is the mail going out, et cetera, communication specific to that segment or persona? That's how, traditionally, logically, you would drive personalization. So the question for both of you again is, do we feel this possible with the amount of data we have, the quality of data we have in your institute, for instance, David and Sasha, whatever you have seen in your experience in this industry?
I mean, my answer is I think so. And I would also say that I think that the pendulum swung dramatically from no personalization to maybe over personalization, and now we got to find the right middle ground. I mean,
Yeah.
originally, when I was applying for schools, I got these big, beautiful catalogs from schools that were like little brochures, and they were all the same thing. And that, that was something tangible. Then for a period of time, everybody wanted everything to be, hyper personalized. The minute you open something up, it's got to look like me and talk like me and be exactly like me. And then suddenly you're in an echo chamber. And so I think the question is a balance of making sure you're addressing what the consumer is looking for, the prospect, the applicant, the student, whomever, with what they may not know, they need to know.
Correct.
And I think that's the balance that happens. And so I don't think it's possible or frankly necessary to make every experience digitally, precisely fine-tuned for one person, because I think there are some things that you just need to tell people. But my sense is that, increasingly the amount of data available is really robust. With the advent of AI, you can kind of learn more from it than you could historically, and there's a lot of mechanisms by which you can deliver a personal experience. So I feel optimistic about the ability to figure out, over the next couple of years, the best way to get the information to students.
I believe we have enough data to be doing more than what we're doing right now.
Okay.
I believe the quality of the data is only now becoming understood to the broader higher education community. And that is to say that for years, higher education, when it focused on, let's say, just data security, right? We were protecting ourselves from others in the academy. That was the priority. This is Burge's data. This is David's data. And therefore, he can understand it. He can access it. He can utilize it, but nobody else can, right? And imagine replicating that there's a David in all of these university functions who think the same way, and therefore the data exists, but it's unusable because it's not shared and democratized. And data as a university asset is an idea that is gaining momentum as digital natives, I think, rise into legitimate C-suite positions of authority and power, which I'm not sure we're there at scale yet. It's still, I think, boomers, Gen Xers, and a few millennials that are sitting in these seats, right? 10 years from now, to Sasha's point, or a few years from now, that's going to get better and better, and the demands are going to get bigger and bigger. But it's possible, and I would argue it's essential to scale. Period.
Yeah. No, excellent. I think it's been a good conversation. So I think broadly, if we go back into what our broad theme was, digital first or digital enabled, I think mostly, I think the agreement between both of you, and I agree, is it's largely towards the digital enabled side. Whichever we do, there's still going to be significant amount of value, like in any sales process, to a human-to-human connection. But how well do you empower that connection also using technology is something we are looking at, and from an efficiency standpoint. Now, if we were to summarize broadly from your standpoint, we can begin with you, Sasha. Lay of land a little bit, our conversation today, and what are we likely to see balance half of the year?
I mean, I think David won the battle with the AI bingo card reference. I think there's going to be, a lot of applications of this great new technology deployed into existing systems. And I think right now it's all just kind of chatbots, and those are fine. They kind of existed before. They're slightly better now. That doesn't really excite me. I'm not sure what the right application is of AI. As we've been talking, I've been thinking like maybe the best application for the next 5 years is actually going to be kind of hidden from consumers, and it's going to be to understand that huge amount of data that's there and figure out what to do all with that. But I think that's going to be the main, focus over the rest of the year. And I think that as, whether or not the markets settle down and kind of the external forces that right now are behaving in a somewhat unorthodox manner, if that settles down, I think there'll be, a lot more innovation. But I think that if it continues as we've seen in the last month, it's going to slow that innovation down, because I think people are going to be more worried about whether or not they're going to be able to get the basic funding they've expected for the last, many decades. So I think it remains to be seen. Best case scenario, I think we figure out how to use AI most effectively in enrollment.
David?
The way you just described, AI is the way that I feel like I'm getting pitched AI by the people who are coming to me and wanting me to buy something. They're pitching it as a force multiplier, and the ability to say, all right, you could pay a single recruiter, and that single recruiter could do this set of things, or you could pay for this technology tool which can replicate 75% or 70% of that output of that recruiter, and magnify that across infinite number of more interactions, infinite number of more calculations. And then in the end, though, right, it's about your understanding matters, but you have to execute strategy, right? And so the ability for AI to execute strategy is I think the limiting factor.
Yeah.
And one that's you can get over, but it's you have to train your systems and your processes, and to a certain extent your people, to create the environment that'll unlock that. And so moving forward, and I mean the next wave of this, I think is going to be actually challenging some of our core assumptions. I mean, I look at somewhat living in fear of new players entering the education space, players like Google, players like
Amazon, yeah.
And these, if somebody can take us off of the semester model, the 9-week model, the 10-week model, which it's just sort of like smaller versions of the old model, then that's the part, the innovation that is potentially going to be more limiting.
Yeah, no, excellent. So I think, my takeaway on the AI piece a little bit. So I had started using this term, I think 4 or 5 years back, and then stopped using it. And I think it's time again to start using it again, is augmented intelligence instead of artificial, So I had to take, artificial became the buzz because, the Gartners, the Forresters, the markets need a buzz to go and resell the same stuff again. So everybody starts claiming the buzz and then they sell it. And it's a cycle. And I'm guilty as well of following that cycle. But the true usage is really, how do you enable a human to perform better in their current roles? So, like I was discussing with someone who said the fear is not that AI will take away the job. It's a person who uses AI better in their job will take away your job, really. So it is, how do you use AI to do better at your own work is really the threat for people who don't do it. It's just not directly with agentic AI yet. With data, and Sasha, you mentioned very interesting, there are the standard chatbots, there are the standard sort of Gen AI output of mails being created, because content, image, and video is sort of being cracked by the large language models. And anyone can use it, very quickly develop a little layer around it and have a solution around some of these problems. I have not seen enough, honestly, yet on the data side. And that is where I feel the maximum value is to a human as well. Because if I am now empowered with much more relevant data, and it doesn't take me to query it, and it doesn't need me to, be an expert in how do I get access and correlate data, let the model figure out, let the AI model figure out and provide that insight to me. Now I am better at my job if I use it the right way. And I think that's a place where we'll hopefully see some more movement. going ahead, and that may be an area for us to keep a watch on. So, gentlemen, with that, I think thank you so much for your time this morning. Very intriguing conversation, and hopefully we continue the dialogue another quarter down the line and see what's changed.
Thanks for having it. Great conversation.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you.